I know that the concept of a trans person explaining their experiences for the internet isn't a new idea. This topic isn't original, but I suppose covering it myself will be useful, firstly, as a way to journal my experiences, and secondly, because the specific way in which I explain things is something that brings people to my content, and I suppose that applying that to this topic might be entertaining. This series will be written out in chapters because that's been a useful tool to help me visualize this journey in a healthy way. As much as my trans friends would love to see me do everything at once, I'd rather do certain things during certain chapters. That way I can put my best effort towards the specific parts I'm focusing on in each chapter, plus it keeps me from being overwhelmed. I have a feeling this will be the longest chapter since it's going to cover the past 7 years of my life, but we'll see if that prediction ages poorly. We'll start at my trans epoch, which was roughly 7 years ago. I was in my late teens, and I didn't like that so many things were arbitrarily gendered. I didn't like that society shames doing feminine things if you're AMAB, and makes you feel out of place if you don't like masculine things as much as your AMAB peers. Based on these thoughts, I decided to identify as non-binary and go by they-them pronouns. I also acknowledged that, despite not being aware of much in terms of gender dysphoria, I was afraid of my voice getting deeper. When I'd hear a recording of it, I'd love how non-binary it sounded, but would also feel bad because I wouldn't be taken seriously as I sounded young and a bit feminine. Two traits that immediately trigger a cishet's don't take this person seriously nodes. Basically put, I liked my voice in terms of self-expression, but felt conflicted because of how other people might perceive me. That made figuring out how I felt difficult. Looking at my trans epoch in hindsight, I think I defined myself more by trying to escape restrictive societal labels and less by what I would actually become if I was free of such labels. I put myself in a neutral zone without actually developing who I was in terms of gender identity. Although, to be fair to my past self, we sometimes have an easier time figuring out who we don't want to be than who we want to actually become. This will be a recurring theme. Fast forward about 4 years, and I was occasionally considering actually doing something to transition. I was shaving my body every now and then, but it became a more regular ritual after an acid trip made me realize just how dysphoric my body hair made me. The hallucinations made my arm hairs wave gently like the ocean, and to a normal person that would seem relaxing, but it freaked me out. It made me conscious of my body, something I was otherwise good at ignoring. Another recurring theme up to and around this point was an odd feeling with trans media. It's a bit like discovering a weird kink. Maybe you see it as a theme in a cartoon or a video game or somewhere else random, and you get this odd feeling, but it doesn't quite click. I felt like that about a lot of different things. That one Brook Valley comic about being able to wear whatever I want, or that one furry animation where the character is going through a transition timeline while restoring a car, or Philosophy Tube's coming out video, or Vanilla Coyote's hourly comics where she realizes she's trans. I would also have the intrusive thought every couple of months or so where I'd ask myself, what if I end up being trans? If I'm trans, will I realize it in time? What if? Around this time, I also decided to see my primary for a general health checkup. A lot of people I cared about depended on me, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't suffering any health issues that could compromise that. I also went because I was trying to figure out if there was some underlying issue I could fix that was causing my intense energy and motivation issues that I'm being medicated regularly for. Of course, I later realized that it most likely stems from executive dysfunction issues, but at the time I had a hard time believing executive dysfunction could be that bad, and assumed that it was really because I had low vitamin B12 or an iron deficiency or something. As expected, I was chastised pretty quickly for my weight and told that my regular walks barely counted as exercise, but in my defense, a depressive rut really fucks with both of those things, especially when you're not medicated at all for severe executive dysfunction. Seriously, the adult years I spent unmedicated are largely a blur now. My memories of them are poor. It was that bad. I am literally disabled. Aside from that, the doc ordered some labs, and when I brought up concerns over a bit of balding that had started at the crown of my head, I was told that I could either do hair transplants for thousands of dollars or take a pill daily that will slow it down. I decided to try the pill, but when I realized how expensive it was for a month's supply, I gave up and was dissuaded from doing anything about it at all. By the way, as much as I felt bad about balding at such a young age, aesthetic issues that AMAB people find embarrassing, such as balding and gynecomastia, are much more common and happen a lot earlier than people think. Seriously, look it up. Anyways, the lab results came back and everything looked good. My A1C was low, my lipids were fine, my vitamin B12 levels were okay, and my testosterone levels were low. Like, just under the low end of healthy for my age levels of low. I actually celebrated that because it's where I wanted my levels as a non-binary person. In hindsight, I really should have taken that as a sign to start HRT. Despite those good lab results, the defeat I felt in regards to my balding further cemented a theme in my life, that my body is an obstacle of which I had little control over, and the best way to cope with this was to ignore my body. Even before I was medicated for my disability, my body felt like something that didn't want to cooperate with me. I was quick to blame my executive dysfunction issues on being a fat, lazy piece of shit because that's what society had taught me. If you aren't energetic or can't get stuff done, then that's a you issue and you should feel shameful. It was liberating to realize that these issues weren't my fault, and in the words of my psychiatrist, if you don't even have the energy to do your hobbies, that's not laziness, that's a disability. Fast forward to a little more than a year ago, and I had reached a huge milestone, losing 1/5 of my body weight through fasting. In a few months, I had basically kicked obesity's ass. I'd lost so much weight that my dad didn't recognize me when I was out for a walk as he was driving by. My coworkers have told me that my employee badge photo looks unrecognizable compared to who I am now. There's something really satisfying about changing yourself so much that people openly mention how you're so different from your previous self. It feels nice to look at family photographs and think, who the hell's that? I'm not them anymore. That said, I don't think I'd recommend fasting, in part because it's easy to do irresponsibly, but also because you sometimes lose muscle along with all the fat, and if you aren't careful, you can feel really woozy when you're more than a couple of days into a fast. There were a few times where I'd push myself too far, and getting up too quickly would black out my vision for a dozen seconds. One time I even fell over. Not great. Losing the weight, especially so quickly, also accentuates the male fat distribution. Also not great. Losing lots of weight can also increase testosterone levels. Super not great. We love to believe that when experiencing a negative symptom, we can pin it down to one simple problem. I wanted to believe that the energy and motivation issues stemming from my executive dysfunction could be fixed by getting more of a certain supplement in my body or losing weight. But really, it's a combination of being medicated, getting good sleep, being medicated, exercising regularly, and being medicated. I straight up do not function without my meds. Wow. Likewise, as much as I wanted to believe that my body negativity was exclusively from my weight, something I'd been given a hard time about for pretty much my whole life, it wasn't so simple. In the time after having lost so much weight and vastly improving my relationship with food in general, I was struggling with the feeling of not being valid enough as a non-binary person, or that non-binary people aren't valid enough to take HRT. But over time, the non-binary people I followed were talking about how they had started taking or were already taking HRT, and every time I saw those posts, I felt sad. I felt a sort of longing jealousy. I should probably be doing that. The dysphoria triggered by my body hair was getting harder to ignore, especially on my hands and arms, but also on the rest of my body, which made it difficult to look at myself in the mirror. Normal people seem to take a lot of selfies and do video calls every now and then, but that's just because the average person looks nice, certainly better than me. I'm just like this because I'm uniquely ugly, right? There came a long week where I was busy with work and took effort to still hang out with friends and exercise between shifts, so my week didn't devolve into work, sleep, work, sleep. But one thing I'd neglected to take care of was my body hair. The dysphoria was really starting to get to me, and when I finally had a free day to take care of it, I wasn't cautious with my depilatory cream and had chemically burned myself so bad that others were able to notice. Looking at myself in the mirror, I distinctly noted that the burns hurt less than the dysphoria. They didn't look as ugly in the mirror as the hair that was on me before. Maybe some people have a moment where things click and they realize they're trans, but for me, the moment where things clicked was realizing that I needed to do something about this part of me, or I was going to end up hurting myself a lot more. Before this point, my gender expression wasn't something I thought much about. In part, this was ironically because trans people have been prevalent in my life for so long. They tend to talk more about their struggles than the process of questioning their gender or what the experience of being trans is like. So I thought I could compromise with these feelings by identifying as non-binary and leaving it there. Being trans would have made my, at the time, already really difficult life more difficult, and I didn't feel like I could handle that. If I don't question these things, maybe it'll go away. It'll fade into the background noise of my anxieties and depression. Thankfully, though, I was at a time in my life where I could handle the extra stress. I'd lost weight, I was getting regular exercise, I was being medicated, and I had plenty of enriching friends and hobbies that I spent my time on. So it was finally time to confront this part of myself, and that first started with an endo appointment. By all means, I was still really scared. What if I'm not taken seriously because I'm non-binary? What if insurance doesn't cover it? What if my parents find out before I'm ready to let them know? My boyfriend, who had been on HRT for a couple weeks at that point, sent me the number to schedule an appointment with an informed consent clinic, and to this day, I still remember how he put it. Oh, it's easy. Just call. And Anytime I told him about my anxieties, he stressed to me that I needed to do this first, and I could cross those bridges when I get to them. His encouragement helped me start my journey. I felt like he always knew the right things to say. You know those cartoons where someone needs to make a stressful phone call? They've got a calendar and a notepad out, and their phone is sitting on a table or desk. They're doing every little house chore, pacing around the room, and eventually put the number in before waiting a few more minutes to press call. Yeah, that was me. The call itself went well. The receptionist was nice, and I had a date for a telehealth appointment. The day before my appointment, I set up my webcam that I hadn't used in years and made sure everything was working. It forced me to come to terms with a part of my body I was ignoring, my balding. It had gotten a lot worse in the time since my health checkup years ago, in part due to my T-spiking from all the weight loss. And holy cow, did I ever panic over that. When I asked him, my boyfriend told me he noticed it getting worse, but never mentioned it because he knew I'd feel bad. That's the weird thing about balding. Everyone notices, but nobody tells you because there's this universal understanding that it's a sensitive subject for the person who's going through it. Maybe that's why I felt like I was being called Sir and Mr. so much. Maybe people were being formal not out of respect, but out of pity? I don't want to think about it. On the morning of my appointment, I saw a preview of my webcam and still had a lot of trouble looking at the image staring back at me. I felt like I wasn't presentable and tried to fix myself up until I eventually stopped and said, "If this was something you could fix in a few minutes, you wouldn't need this appointment, now would you?" My endo was really nice. I mentioned that I identified as non-binary since my late teens and talked about the things actively causing me dysphoria: my voice, my balding, and my body hair. Her advice on the balding was leagues better than my primary. I had no idea there were treatments to get it to grow back, so that made me feel pretty hopeful. I was put on finasteride and a low dose of an anti-androgen for the time being since I was still unsure about my identity and didn't know how to feel about breast growth from estradiol. But this was still a huge step forward. My prescriptions came in later that afternoon, and I drove through negative 40-degree Fahrenheit weather to pick them up. I was that excited. 3 months of my meds came out to less than a third of what the cost of 1 month of Fin from my primary would have cost. Did I mention my endo is awesome? Every bridge I thought I was going to run into, I didn't. My identity was respected, not questioned. Insurance covered everything, and my parents didn't know a damn thing. Despite a smooth appointment, this was only the beginning of some real gender exploration. The first part of this exploration was realizing that transitioning is about seeking gender euphoria as much as minimizing gender dysphoria. Prior to this, I thought that a step in transitioning was only valid if not doing so made you feel dysphoric. The effects I'd get out of feminizing HRT were things that I thought would make me feel better, but because I didn't feel active agony over lacking those things, I didn't think I was valid enough to actually deserve them. Gender euphoria is the other half of the experience, and I was gatekeeping myself from it. One way I practiced this realization was by trying out a different name. I thought I needed to feel dysphoria over my name being too masculine, and while some trans people do, I learned that the other way they feel dysphoria over their name is when they switch to one they like so much better that their dead name starts to cause dysphoria. Which is exactly what happened to me. The second part of my real gender exploration centered around further exploring my feelings about gender in general. While a lot of these feelings are motivated by dysphoria, trauma also plays a role. The idea of turning into my dad, both mentally and physically, not only scares the shit out of me, but makes me feel intensely dysphoric. If I had to choose between looking more like my mother or my father when I get older, I would pick my mom in a heartbeat. I don't hate my dad, but at times he feels like a reverse role model. On another note, I have feelings of disgust towards being the same gender as people who women and minorities can't feel safe around. Throughout the years, many women have felt comfortable confiding with me that they've been raped or sexually assaulted, and while I'm glad they trusted me enough to tell me those things, that further built up my disgust with identifying as male. Yes, I'm aware that all genders are capable of doing horrible things, but a misogynist society goes out of its way to enable cis males to do horrible things, and I wanted to give up this privilege. I like using my other privileges to help people, but this specific one was something I was more than happy to forfeit. Besides, I can't use this privilege to help others, since doing so requires an understanding of how to be a cis man. I just don't get cis men, especially the stereotypical dude bro flavor that loves roughhousing, sports, womanizing, meaningless status symbols, and stupid social competitions to feel like the bigger man lest they feel emasculated over some trivial bullshit. That last one is especially insufferable. I'm aware that most of these are traits of toxic masculinity, but avoiding those traits didn't feel like it gave me enough distance from masculinity. Even if I avoided these traits, there's still the fact that I'm going to be shoved into spaces with people who are more likely to exhibit them in the first place if I don't transition. There are other little details akin to that which stick out too. When people get to know me, they understand that they're safe around me and can talk about whatever they need to without being judged. But in everyday life, people don't get that impression from my appearance. If I'm out for a walk and a woman is on the same path, they reroute to avoid me. I don't take it personally. I get it. These days I try to reroute so they don't have to, but it'd be nice not to be identified on the spot as being a member of the enemy team, so to speak. I don't like coming across as intimidating simply because I'm male presenting. So, how do I want to present myself? That was the third part of my real gender questioning. Initially, I classified myself as a feminine MB, a fembi, if you will. I preferred they-them pronouns and thought that a feminine-leaning non-binary person was an apt description. I didn't really know how to feel about having breasts, but otherwise wanted all the effects of feminizing HRT. I also enjoyed the few articles of feminine clothing I'd tried. Although, to be fair, I didn't otherwise care much about stylizing myself for the majority of my life. Before my gender questioning, I interpreted such indifference as being above vanity, but in hindsight, it was because I felt like accessorizing myself or having a nicer wardrobe was pointless because I was effectively putting lipstick on a pig. Diving more into clothing is a Chapter 2 activity, but I'm doing little things like wearing bracelets and a dysphoria beanie with fun pins in it. It doesn't make my dysphoria go away, but I'm more capable of taking an occasional selfie or doing a video call now. Also, skirts are amazing and shorts are objectively inferior. If all skirts had pockets, there'd be no reason to wear shorts. Holy fuck, I love skirts. Even cis males would benefit from skirts being seen as unisex. And no, not kilts, skirts. The men's skirts subreddit is full of examples. It was really nice to scroll through and get a glimpse of what a world that doesn't gender clothing so much would look like. But anyways, I'm getting off track. I felt pretty confident wanting to present as a fembi, but when talking about all this with friends, some of them were confused. You sound like a trans woman. Why not just be a trans woman? And my response used to be that I'd ask myself the she-her question when I was further into my transition. Once I was a couple years in, I could assess if where I was would be enough or if I wanted to go further from there. But this was me dodging an uncomfortable realization. The she-her question, let alone how I felt about having breasts, was less about what I actually wanted and more about fear. It took a lot of conversations with very understanding trans friends and a lot of crying, but I eventually landed on the realization that my real identity is as a non-binary trans woman. I'd already enjoyed, ironically, being called girl or girly pop. Girly pop is such a fun word. So is gawk, and I intend on keeping mine since I don't have bottom dysphoria. Likewise, when my boyfriend said he'd help me find bras once my chest starts growing and a binder to stealth at work, my decision in regards to breast growth could be more about what I actually wanted and not about anxiety. Also, it was becoming easier to separate how I felt about my weight from how I felt about my gender. While I'm still trying to lose more weight, I realized at this stage that I hate the masculine distribution of it more than the amount, and that I hated my chest not because it made me feel fat, but because my breasts are in awkward shape and would look nicer if they were actual breasts. Being a trans woman feels more daunting than being a fembi, but it's more authentic to who I actually am. For the time being, I've been going by they-them in real life and she-her online. I still can't handle the disconnect between feminine pronouns and my current body, but online I'm not as conscious of my physical form, so I let people call me by feminine pronouns. I think part of this stems from the transphobic rhetoric that was everywhere in 2016 during my formative teen years, which is unfortunately still stuck in my subconscious today. I don't want to feel like a man in a dress, and I hate feeling that I'm pretending to be a woman, or that other people in real life are pretending to treat me as one out of charitable pity. I hate that. However, I also hate pretending to be a male, so they-them works in the interim. Transitioning is so damned scary that it's not an uncommon experience for people to transition into transitioning by having a femboy era or a non-binary era. Not that I mean to imply either are always trans women in denial, though. Regardless, even once someone does start transitioning, they might do it in steps because this is a string of big life changes and it's overwhelming to do all of them at once. Are there days where I still struggle with imposter syndrome or feeling I'm not trans enough to do these things? Absolutely. Society feels very comfortable giving you a hard time over big life changes, especially transitioning, because you need to prove to the world that you're absolutely super duper positively sure that you want it. But like I said earlier, I'm more confident about what I don't want than what I do want. Do I want to live the rest of my life walking this earth as a woman? Most likely, yeah. Do I want to keep doing so as a man? Fuck no. Do I get intense dysphoria every single time I look in the mirror? No. But is deciding to compromise with my dysphoria by doing nothing more than continuing to shave my body and letting my hair grow out going to actually make me feel better? Also no. If I was faking it, I'd be able to stop when it feels bad. But I can't. Especially when I'm tired or haven't done self-care, my dysphoria is at its worst. I've absolutely had days where I wake up and ask, why me? Or wish that there was a cure. I mean, there is, it's called estrogen, but you know what I mean. Really, I'm trying to get to the same point with my trans identity that I've gotten to with my autism. When I was told as a kid that I was autistic, I basically took that as if someone said I was mentally stunted with zero ability for empathy, because at the time, that's pretty much what society believed autistic people were. I wanted it to go away. But nowadays, all the debilitating bits are worth the positive things I get out of it. It's a valuable part of my personality, and I wouldn't give it up for the world. I know I can get to the same point with being trans, but for the time being, it's 90% annoying dysphoria and maybe 10% euphoria. The HRT I'm on hasn't done much yet. I'm not going to get too in-depth on the sexual side effects, especially since most of the physical ones are minimal for the time being, but I've noticed that I'm more comfortable in sexual situations. I wasn't unable to enjoy them before, but my range of expression is improved, and I feel more comfortable complimenting the bodies of the person or people I'm with in such interactions. As for the emotional side of things, my emotions feel a bit bigger, and my friends have noticed that I'm a bit more lively and happy since starting HRT. I've started seeing a therapist for the first time in years because I have a feeling this trend of my emotions getting bigger will continue when I eventually get prescribed estradiol during my next endo appointment. Some trans people describe starting HRT like seeing color for the first time or being able to actually feel their emotions since they were heavily dissociating before to cope with their dysphoria. But I predict that my experience will be more like my world feeling desaturated and someone finally turning the colors up. Before I was medicated for my disability, my world certainly felt colorless. I didn't experience emotion because I wasn't even a person. I was a thing that existed either to sleep or to feel groggy and meaningless for a few hours before going back to sleep. Nowadays, I'm an actual person, and I feel emotions, but I think they're not at their full functionality yet. The best way I can describe it is that each emotion is like a boulder, and it needs enough pushing behind it to get it down the hill to be experienced. The way I've started to feel being on HRT is that it takes less pushing to experience that emotion. It's easier for me to find things genuinely funny now. I can appreciate humor a lot more. And not, I grinned a little or I breathed out of my nose harder than usual, but a little cackle or an actual laugh. I've been enjoying that lately. Yeah, my emotions are going to be more unstable because they have more range, but I'm starting to realize that the way I was experiencing them still suffered from some flavor of numbness due to not having yet addressed this part of myself. Vanilla Coyote puts it best in Dysphonia when she says, quote, "I didn't know it yet, but I was miserable," when describing her pre-transition self. Media like that helped a lot too. Dysphonia was helpful and became more relatable as I was further into my gender questioning, and Searing Oof's Unknown Longing comics also played a part in helping me navigate these feelings. But anyways, that pretty much sums up Chapter 1 of my journey with transitioning. Chapter 2 will begin once I've started taking estradiol and experimenting further with clothing. I'm sure I'll be allowing other new trans experiences to happen as well, but those are the two big ones that will help me define the start of Chapter 2. In the meantime, I just need to keep consistent with my medication, continue doing my trans femme exercises, and keep my dysphoria at bay.